You will never be a hero. Get out of my sight before I call security to drag you out of this hall." My dad's venomous voice echoed off the marble walls of the Joint Special Operations Command sanctuary, cutting like a jagged knife through the solemn silence. Beside him, my sister Chloe crossed her arms, her lips curling into a vicious, predatory smirk. Standing next to her was Lieutenant David Miller, her Navy SEAL fiancé, who merely frowned, keeping his mouth shut to protect his VIP status. They decided to humiliate me right here in the sacred halls of real warriors. To them, I was just a pathetic civilian IT girl, feeding off government scraps a stain, trying to ride the coattails of their wealthy elite defense contractor empire. I didn't argue. I didn't cry. My posture remained bone-straight, heels locked together, hands clasped behind my back in parade rest. I silently swallowed the insult, letting the red-hot humiliation burn in my chest. I stayed perfectly still, knowing full well that a suffocating heavy silence was currently choking the 300 combat veterans surrounding us, as my dad puffed his chest in pride. Until the Vice Admiral pointed directly at me from the podium and roared, "Sir, you are the angel of death." I watched the color drain from every face in the front row. The truth was a detonation charge, and the fuse had just been lit. Before I tell you what happened, take a second to like and subscribe. But only if this story hits close to home. And let me know in the comments, where are you watching from, and what time is it there right now? To understand the sheer arrogance that was about to be crushed beneath a military boot, I have to take you back inside the Williams empire. My dad, Marcus Williams, was never a father in any biological or emotional sense that mattered. He was the CEO of Williams Corp, a billion-dollar defense contractor who priced everything in dollars and political leverage, including his own children. We were line items on a spreadsheet. Assets or liabilities, nothing in between. I stood in his sprawling cigar-choked study one evening, hands folded neatly in front of me, watching him examine defense contract bids like a king inventorying conquered territory. Towers of classified Pentagon procurement documents sat on his mahogany desk beside a half-empty bottle of 30-year scotch. He didn't look up when I walked in. He never did. To him, I was furniture a zero on his balance sheet. I clenched my jaw and waited, standing on the Persian rug that cost more than my first car, while he scratched notes with a gold fountain pen that glinted under the green banker's lamp. "Close the door on your way out," he said without lifting his eyes. "And tell the housekeeper to press my shirts for the Pentagon dinner, both of them. Not the one you wore last Easter that was embarrassing enough." He didn't mean the shirt, he meant me. My presence, my existence at his table. I pressed my lips together, turned on my heel, and closed the heavy oak door with enough control to keep the hinges from squeaking. My knuckles were bone white. My pulse was steady. I had been trained to absorb worse than this in interrogation resistance courses at Fort Bragg. But nothing you experience in a black site hits the same as your own father treating you like the hired help, like an inconvenience in his own bloodline. Then there was Chloe, the flawless golden child. My dad's masterpiece, a weapon of social manipulation disguised in designer silk, and a degree from Georgetown she barely earned. I watched her glide through a high society charity dinner at a Beltway hotel, working her practiced predatory smile on retired generals and their wives to secure defense bids. She cornered flag officers by the shrimp cocktails and whispered budget figures like love letters, her manicured hand resting on a brigadier general's forearm while she steered the conversation toward Williams Corp's latest proposal. I stood near the catering staff in a cheap, unmarked pantsuit, maintaining my civilian IT cover. Nobody looked at me twice. That was the point. Chloe floated past me and drove her sharp elbow straight into my shoulder, a deliberate dig aimed at the nerve cluster above my collarbone. She leaned in close, her perfume thick and suffocating enough to taste a sickly sweet cloud of jasmine and entitlement. "Try not to embarrass us tonight," she hissed through her porcelain smile. "Just stand in the corner where the help belongs." I adjusted my collar. I noted the exact pressure point she targeted, second rib, left side 3 centimeters below the clavicle. I filed that detail alongside every other data point I had been silently collecting on the Williams family operation for years. Chloe didn't know what intelligence gathering looked like. She was too busy being the product my father sold. Their sharpest new acquisition was Lieutenant David Miller, an 03 Navy SEAL with a chest full of combat ribbons and a jaw built for recruiting posters. Miller was the ultimate VIP ticket, the golden son-in-law who would blow open the Pentagon's inner circle for my dad's corporate machine. I watched them pose for Forbes magazine in the courtyard of our Virginia estate on a Sunday afternoon. My dad had dropped hundreds of thousands on PR firms to manufacture the narrative, the patriotic billionaire father-in-law and the hero seal, defending America together. A portrait of wealth and valor, handcrafted for the cover. Miller stood in his dress whites, shifting his weight from boot to boot, uncomfortable but compliant. The Rolex on his wrist, the courtside NBA, seats the black Amex in his wallet, they were all chains disguised as gifts, and he wore every single one without complaint. I observed from the second-floor window, tracing the sightlines the way I trace satellite feeds at work. I cataloged how deeply they were corrupting a man who had once knelt before a flag and sworn an oath to the Constitution. Miller had real valor, real scars, but the Williams family had a way of hollowing people out and filling them with obedience. In their narcissistic lens, I was a failure. A girl tapping on a keyboard for a government paycheck that wouldn't cover Chloe's monthly shoe budget. An embarrassment they kept around only to make themselves look brighter by comparison. I walked away from the window and pulled my encrypted JSOC communications device from the false panel behind the bookshelf in my bedroom. My thumb traced the cold titanium edge of the secure phone. I didn't need their validation. I operated in a world they couldn't fathom, a world where a single correct decision at 3 a.m. meant 12 men came home breathing, instead of zipped inside body bags. I locked the device in my floor safe, pushed the anger below my diaphragm, where I kept everything that needed to stay buried, and started packing my deployment bag for the next mission. People always asked why a hardened military officer allowed herself to be psychologically battered by civilians. The answer was not cowardice. It was a binding oath, a promise made to the only person in the Williams family who ever loved me without conditions. 6 years before that ceremony, I stood in a hospital room that reeked of bleach and fading life. The fluorescent lights hummed and flickered with a faint electrical buzz that made the walls feel like they were breathing. The heart monitor beside the bed beeped in a rhythm that slowed with every exhale, counting down to a number I didn't want to hear. My mother's body was a skeleton wrapped in paper-thin skin, but her eyes burned with a desperate, terrified clarity. Her hand shot out from beneath the hospital blanket and grabbed my wrist, with a strength that had no right to exist in a woman with 3 weeks, to live the grip of someone burning their last reserves of fuel in a single final act of will. "Don't abandon our family, Janet," she whispered, her lungs rattling like crumpled paper bags. "Your dad and sister are lost. Be their anchor." For a soldier, the final words of the dead are a supreme mandate. I covered her bony hand with both of mine. I felt the IV needle shift beneath her skin. I swore that oath the same way I swore my oath of commission, with absolute, unbreakable conviction. I didn't know then that I was chaining myself to a sinking ship filled with people who would use that chain to drag me underwater. That promise became the shackle around my throat. For 6 years, I swallowed their insults, absorbed their contempt, and operated as the invisible shield, keeping their toxic empire from collapsing under its own greed. I attended every holiday dinner where Chloe paraded her latest conquest and Marcus held court with lobbyists. I stood in corners. I carried bags. I bit the inside of my cheek until I tasted copper. Every snide remark from Chloe was another round absorbed by body armor that was slowly cracking. But parasites always mistake mercy for weakness, and last month Marcus crossed the final line. He summoned me into his private study at the Virginia estate. The room smelled like aged bourbon and polished ego. He slammed a locked external hard drive onto his mahogany desk, his pupils dilated with frantic greed. His thick, gold-ringed fingers were trembling not from fear, but from the raw hunger of a man who smelled a billion-dollar kill. He ordered me explicitly and directly to use my civilian IT access to breach the Department of Defense internal network and steal a rival contractor's classified bidding data. Federal treason. He was ordering his own daughter to commit espionage against her own country, against the men and women she had bled beside for a decade. I locked my knees, crossed my arms, stared at him with the flat, unblinking gaze I used on hostile interrogation subjects in secure facilities. "No," I stated. My voice was dead and cold, a single round fired from a suppressed weapon. "My integrity is not your corporate asset." His face crumpled into something feral, something subhuman. His hand whipped to the crystal glass of Merlot sitting on the desk, and he hurled it directly at my face. The heavy red liquid smashed into my cheek, stinging my eyes and soaking my white blouse in a color that looked exactly like blood. Shards of crystal peppered the bookshelf behind me, raining onto the carpet like broken teeth. "You are a useless, ungrateful child." He screamed, his spit flying across the desk, landing on the hard drive he wanted me to use as a weapon against my own nation. His voice cracked on the last word, not from emotion, but from the sheer force of his rage. I didn't flinch. I didn't lift a hand to wipe the wine streaming down my jaw, pooling at my collarbone, soaking into the fabric over my heart. I stood at full attention, letting the cold Merlot drip down my sternum in a slow, steady line. I looked into his eyes and saw the truth clearly, without filters, without the protective lens of a daughter's love, a rabid animal wearing a tailored suit. A man willing to sell out his country for a contract and throw wine in the face of the only person still standing between him and total self-destruction. The oath to my mother expired in that fraction of a second. The parasite had consumed its final meal. I turned on my heel. My wet shoes squeaked softly on the hardwood floor. I didn't say a single word. I walked through the foyer, past the oil painting of the Williams family crest, that ridiculous gold-framed monument to manufactured prestige, and out the front door into the cold Virginia night. I pulled a tactical wipe from my cargo pocket and cleaned the wine off my face in 3 efficient strokes. The shield was gone. The anchor was cut. I climbed into my truck, engaged the ignition, and systematically shifted my entire operational mindset from defensive containment into a full-scale offensive strike. The campaign had begun. My reality didn't exist inside mansions filled with cigar smoke and crystal chandeliers. It existed 50 meters underground inside reinforced concrete behind blast doors that could survive a direct hit from a bunker buster. 1 year before the wine incident, Operation Nightfall went to hell. I stood inside a heavily armored JSOC Tactical Command Center, a subterranean tomb packed with humming server racks and wall-to-wall digital screens. The temperature was a constant 62 degrees, cooled by industrial-grade ventilation systems that never stopped running. The air tasted like ozone and recycled sweat. On a normal night, the screens glowed a steady operational green. On this night, every display had flipped to a pulsing, angry red. Warning tones screamed from every console in the room. Lieutenant Miller's 12-man SEAL team had been herded into a box canyon in the Middle East. An enemy mobile jamming tower, military-grade, recently supplied by a hostile state actor, had completely blacked out their satellite communications. 12 operators were walking directly into the teeth of a prepared ambush, and they had zero awareness. No comms, no air support, no extraction window. Just sand rock and 100 enemy fighters waiting in the ridgeline with belt-fed machine guns. I gripped the edge of the command console, my heart hammering a steady, controlled beat against my ribs. The satellite topography painted the kill zone in stark thermal detail, a funnel with walls on 3 sides and a firing line on the 4th. If those men walked another 400 meters, they were dead. All 12. No survivors. There was no magic in that bunker. Only speed, violence of action, and the electronic warfare operators I had personally selected and trained for exactly this nightmare. I unleashed my Vanguard team. 6 operators hit the keyboards with aggressive precision, launching standard counter-jamming protocols against the enemy frequencies. We bombarded their signal architecture, fracturing their digital armor layer by layer in a brute-force electronic siege. Sweat rolled down my temple and hit the keyboard. The server racks howled at their thermal limits, cooling fans spinning at maximum RPM, heat bleeding into the room. My lead technician yelled countdowns in clipped, urgent bursts, the voice of a man who knew that every second of delay was another step those 12 operators took toward a mass grave. We cracked a single fragile hole in the enemy's electronic wall. 1 narrow radio frequency window. I had exactly 30 seconds before the enemy's automated systems detected the breach and sealed it permanently. I grabbed the master radio headset and pressed it tight against my skull. The static was dense, hissing alive with interference. Then it cleared for a razor-thin sliver of silence, a gap so narrow it felt like trying to speak through a closing door. Bravo, actual abort primary route. Pivot 9 to 0 degrees to the blind cave system. Move, now. I commanded. My voice was cold, sharp, and absolute. No inflection, no hesitation, no room for questions. A command stripped down to its bare operational bones. It was a terrifying gamble. If my topographic analysis was wrong, if one cave passage was collapsed, or one thermal signature was misread, I had just ordered 12 men to run into pitch-black underground tunnels with no extraction route and no way to call for help. They would die in the dark, and it would be my name on the after-action report. But my calculation was flawless. I had spent 11 consecutive hours studying every thermal signature, every terrain contour, every shadow in that canyon before the mission launched. I had mapped those caves from satellite imagery that most analysts didn't even know existed. I listened to Miller's ragged breathing through the headset. He didn't know who was speaking. He didn't know my name, my face, my rank, or my gender. But a soldier in a kill zone does not ask questions when a calm, authoritative voice cuts through the static and offers a way out. Miller obeyed instantly and completely dragging his entire team into the cave system at a dead sprint. The frequency window collapsed. The radios went dead. For 6 hours, I sat motionless at that console, my fingers hovering over the keys, watching satellite heat signatures crawl through the underground passages like slow-moving embers. Nobody in the bunker spoke. We just watched the screen and waited. Then, one by one, 12 thermal dots emerged on the far side of the ridge. Alive, extracted, every single one. The frontline operators never learned my name. But the whisper spread through the special operations community like wildfire, the phantom voice in the dark that pulled Bravo team from the grave. They called me the Angel of Death, the commander who killed enemy operations from the other side of the planet without ever firing a round. 3 days after nightfall, my commanding officer handed me a sealed envelope forwarded through secure channels from the Middle East. No name, no rank, just an unsigned card with 5 words written in shaky handwriting. We came home. Thank you. I pressed my thumb against the ink and slid the card into my vest pocket next to my dog tags. That card weighed more than every diamond Chloe ever wore. It meant more than every dollar Marcus ever counted. Unlike the Williams family, those men in uniform were my real blood. A brotherhood welded together by sacrifice steel and the kind of trust that no contract could purchase and no betrayal could fracture. I hung up the headset, wiped down my station with methodical precision, and received a silent nod from every Vanguard operator in the room. I had an army behind me, and they were ready for whatever came next. When JSOC officially authorized the Distinguished Service Medal for my work on Nightfall, I personally wrote Marcus, Chloe, and Miller onto the VIP guest list. I did not design this as a revenge trap. Not at the beginning. There was still a beating human heart inside my chest, a daughter's heart bruised and scarred and held together with military-grade discipline, but not dead yet. It was a final moral test. One last chance. I walked into my dad's office at the Virginia estate and held out the heavy gold-embossed envelope. The Vice Admiral's official seal gleamed under the desk lamp, thick and unmistakable. My fingers pressed against the stiff cardstock, and for half a second, just half my hand trembled. The only crack in my armor. I was offering this man one last opportunity to see his daughter, to recognize what she had become, to choose fatherhood over profit, to prove my mother right. Marcus snatched the envelope from my grip without looking at my face. His eyes scanned the seal, the 3-star insignia, the classified venue coordinates. I watched his pupils dilate, not with pride, not with curiosity about his daughter's accomplishments, but with the raw commercial hunger of a predator catching a scent. His brain immediately converted the guest list into a networking opportunity. A 3-star general, senior Pentagon officials, a room full of decision-makers with billion-dollar budgets. He assumed the ceremony was for Miller, his golden son-in-law the seal with the camera-ready jawline. Marcus's mind instantly reframed the entire sacred military event into a cheap corporate showcase for the Williams brand. He yanked open his desk drawer, pulled out a heavy leather briefcase, and began aggressively stuffing draft defense contracts inside, planning to corner generals by the buffet table. His thick fingers moved with the frantic energy of a man who smelled fresh money. He didn't look at me. He didn't ask what the medal was for. He didn't ask who was being honored. I was a doorframe, background static, an object that held things open. Chloe walked into the study, adjusting a diamond necklace that cost more than a combat infantry soldier earns in a year. She glanced at me and curled her lip, that automatic sneer she deployed whenever I entered her field of vision. Marcus finally lifted his head, pointing his expensive fountain pen directly at my chest like a weapon. Carry these bags and stay 3 paces behind us. He ordered, his voice carrying the casual authority of a man who had never been told no by anyone who mattered. Don't speak unless spoken to. You're just here to carry my files. I stared at the man who gave me life. I searched his face for any remaining trace of the father my mother had begged me to anchor. I looked for warmth, recognition, even basic human acknowledgement. I found nothing. A hollow, rotting core wrapped in Italian wool and cologne. The test was over. The verdict was absolute. I reached out and picked up his heavy leather briefcase. I felt the weight of the corrupted contracts inside, proposals designed to bleed the military my brothers and sisters bled for. I gave him a crisp, curt nod. My capacity for mercy was empty. The sword of military justice was drawn, and the target had willingly painted a bullseye on his own forehead. I walked out to the driveway to load his luxury SUV. The moral test was complete. The execution was officially scheduled. The morning of the ceremony, Marcus strode through the high-security checkpoint of the JSOC auditorium with the swagger of a medieval king reviewing his subjects. He flashed his VIP credentials at the guard station like they were keys to heaven and barely paused for the metal detector. When a young corporal asked him to open his briefcase for inspection, Marcus laughed a short barking sound of pure contempt and waved the soldier off with his gold-ringed hand. I'm personal friends with the Vice Admiral's son, he snapped. Touch my property and I'll have your commanding officer reassign you to a supply closet. The corporal looked at me. I gave a microscopic nod, let him through. Let him walk into the cage with his chest puffed out and his guard completely down. Chloe floated beside Miller in a ridiculously expensive designer gown that cost enough to fund a platoon's combat gear for 6 months. She clutched Miller's muscular arm and angled her body toward every potential camera angle she could find, making absolutely certain the room saw her standing next to a decorated Navy SEAL. Miller's jaw was tight. His eyes swept the room the way combat operators sweep kill zones automatically, unconsciously. But his brain didn't register what his instincts were screaming at him. Not yet. They took their seats in the front row VIP section, padded leather chairs with brass nameplates, the best view in the house. Marcus immediately opened his briefcase on his lap and began sorting business cards by rank of the target recipient. I stepped forward to deliver a routine security briefing. My voice was calm, professional, measured the voice of a woman who had coordinated kill chains across continents. I reminded them to power down all civilian electronic devices. Classified facility, standard protocol, a formality. That was the trigger. Marcus detonated. His face went purple. He vaulted from his chair and unleashed the tirade that opened this story, screaming at maximum volume that I would never be a hero, demanding security drag me out of the building. Like trash. The words bounced off marble columns and buried themselves into the chests of 300 combat veterans who sat in dead, suffocating silence and watched a civilian billionaire publicly disown his daughter inside the heart of a military sanctuary. Chloe smelled blood in the water. She raised her manicured hand and snapped her fingers aggressively at the heavily armed military police flanking the entrance. Get her out of here, she shrieked, her voice cutting across the room like broken glass. She is bothering my hero fiancé. She genuinely believed that her civilian wealth and her borrowed proximity to a SEAL gave her authority over federal operators carrying loaded weapons inside a classified installation. The audacity was breathtaking. The stupidity was terminal. I stood my ground, hands behind my back, pulse at 62 beats per minute. I let them dig the grave deeper with every word. Then the steel wall moved. 4 military guards, elite operators from my own Vanguard unit, handpicked for this exact assignment, stepped forward from their positions along the auditorium perimeter. Their M4 carbines were pressed tight against tactical vests. They marched directly past me with mechanical precision. And in perfect bone-chilling synchronization, all 4 executed a crisp 180-degree pivot. They turned their backs to me and faced outward. A solid wall of armed muscle Kevlar body armor and loaded rifles that completely boxed in Marcus, Chloe, and Miller. They didn't speak. They didn't need to. Their eyes were flat dead locked onto my family with the calm of men who had killed in combat zones and would do it again without a change in heart rate. The air in the room turned to ice. Marcus's face twitched. The primal instinct of a cornered animal erupted behind his eyes, something deeper than arrogance, deeper than ego, older than money. He felt the shift in power. The room didn't belong to him anymore. No amount of cash, no lobbyist, no senator could buy back what he had just lost. He planted his thick hands on the armrest, preparing to stand up and shout another order at the generals. The vanguard operator nearest to him stepped half a pace forward, his massive frame closing the gap, his hand resting firmly on the handle of his tactical blade. A silent, controlled physical warning. Marcus froze. His jaw clamped shut. His body sank slowly into the leather chair, pulled down by a gravity he had never experienced before, the gravity of consequences. The pincer movement was locked tight. The rats were officially trapped. Minutes later, Vice Admiral Carlson stepped up to the wooden podium. The massive hall, 300 combat veterans seated in perfect rows, fell so silent I could hear the air conditioning vents humming in the ceiling above the stage. The Admiral gripped both edges of the lectern with scarred hands. His chest was a wall of ribbons and combat citations accumulated across 4 decades of service. His piercing eyes swept the room and settled on the front row with a weight that pinned everyone to their seats. Operation Nightfall was not decided by raw firepower. The 3-star Admiral boomed his voice, carrying through the PA system like the toll of a cathedral bell. It was decided by the deadly silence of a commander. A commander who manipulated the battlefield from thousands of miles away, shattering an enemy ambush in the blink of an eye to bring our brothers home. I kept my eyes locked forward. My breathing was slow, even disciplined. But I tracked Miller in my peripheral vision with the precision of a scope. The blood drained from Lieutenant David Miller's face in real time, like watching paint thinner dissolve color from a canvas. His skin turned a sickly ashen gray. His combat instincts, the ones that had been sedated by Rolex watches, champagne dinners, and Chloe's perfumed manipulation, erupted through the civilian conditioning like a grenade detonating inside his chest. His eyes darted around the room at combat speed, connecting tactical dots. The Vanguard guards were physically shielding me. My posture was locked into the exact millimeter-perfect stance of a senior commanding officer. And the classified name of the operation that nearly killed him and his 12 men was being broadcast across a room full of people who knew what it meant. His breathing hitched. His chest heaved under his medals. His hands gripped his kneecaps so hard his knuckles whitened. Seeing a seasoned Navy SEAL realize he had been living inside the enemy's family compound while abusing his actual savior, that is a level of karma you rarely witness in one lifetime. But before the physical violence erupts, please like this video and share your own stories in the comments. Let me know how you handled the narcissists in your life. But Marcus saw none of it. His ego had constructed a soundproof bunker around his brain, a fortress of self-importance so thick that no amount of obvious evidence could penetrate it. He was deaf to the tactical geometry of the room, blind to the armed walls surrounding him, oblivious to his daughter standing at parade rest 30 feet away with the bearing of a commanding officer. He elbowed Miller hard in the ribs and leaned over with a frantic, greedy grin splitting his face. "Stand up straight, David. He's talking about you." Marcus hissed through his teeth, his eyes glittering with the manic energy of a man already composing the press release in his head. "Go get your glory, hurry up and get the camera, Chloe." He patted his suit pocket, checking on his stack of business cards, ready to start handing them out like candy the moment the applause started. Miller didn't move. His jaw was clamped so tight I could see the tendons straining in his neck from across the room. Slowly, mechanically, like a gun turret rotating on a warship, he turned his head to the left and looked past the wall of Vanguard guards. His eyes locked onto mine. And I watched the final calculation happen behind those combat-hardened irises. The variable he had been missing for an entire year slotted into place with an almost audible click. The civilian IT girl he had ignored at dinner parties. The sister-in-law he let Chloe mock and demean without saying a word. The background noise he never bothered to tune into. She was the voice in the dark. I held his gaze across that crowded room. I didn't smile. I didn't blink. I gave him one slow microscopic nod, the kind of acknowledgement a commanding officer gives to a soldier who has finally completed a very difficult mission. The truth had arrived. And today we stand here to honor her service. Vice Admiral Carlson declared, his voice ringing through the auditorium like the bell of a final judgment. "Please step up to the podium, Lieutenant Commander Janet Williams, known to our elite forces by the call sign, the Angel of Death." The sentence dropped like a massive sledgehammer onto plate glass. 300 senior officers stood up simultaneously. The deafening crack of boot heels snapping together echoed like a gunshot, a wall of concussive sound that hit the chest cavity before the ears could process it. Then came the roar. Applause that shook the floorboards, rattled the water glasses on the VIP tables, and rolled across the auditorium like controlled thunder from every direction at once. Marcus's face went white, then gray, then a shade I had never seen on living human skin, something between cremation ash and pure animal terror. His mouth worked open and shut, producing no sound, like a fish ripped from deep water and thrown onto burning asphalt. His illusionary castle, the empire of lies he had built with lobbying dollars, PR campaigns, and stolen valor, shattered into dust around him. But a true narcissist never surrenders gracefully. His survival instinct erupted into pure, unhinged panic. He slammed his fist on the armrest and vaulted to his feet, fighting against the Vanguard guards, boxing him in, shoving against body armor with his soft, uncalloused hands. "Halt this ceremony. This is a sick fraud. This bitch is a criminal. She hacked your system." He shrieked, his voice cracking and breaking, spit flying onto the polished marble floor. "I have the best lawyers. I know the state senator. You are being played by a lunatic." Chloe's mask dissolved. The golden child, the Georgetown lobbyist, the predatory socialite who had commanded rooms full of generals with a single smile. She crumbled into a hysterical wreck, clawing at Miller's arm with her manicured nails, smearing her lipstick across her own chin. "David, tell them the truth. Tell them you commanded that mission." She screamed, her voice raw and shredded. The fatal strike came from the very weapon the parasites worshipped. Lieutenant Miller ripped his arm away from Chloe with such brutal force that she stumbled backward into the row of chairs, her designer gown catching on the armrest. Operating on pure aggressive SEAL instinct and the same primal wiring that had kept him alive in a canyon full of enemy fighters, Miller grabbed Marcus by the shoulder and violently shoved the billionaire backward into his seat. The impact knocked the wind from Marcus's lungs in a single pathetic grunt. "Shut your garbage mouth right now!" Miller roared, his deep voice dominating the entire auditorium, silencing Chloe mid-scream and freezing Marcus in his chair. He stood over the billionaire, 6 feet 2 inches of combat muscle, casting a dark shadow across the crumpled man who had once bought his loyalty with a watch. He spun around. Boot heels cracked together. He threw a razor-sharp salute directly at me, a full textbook military salute, the kind you render to a commanding officer who has earned it with blood and sacrifice. His eyes burned with fierce, absolute loyalty. They are honoring the commander who pulled me and my men from the dead. He barked, his voice aimed at Marcus like a weapon. "And you're a piece of scum who doesn't even have the right to speak her name." Miller ripped the heavy diamond-encrusted Rolex off his wrist, the bribe, the golden chain, the leash Marcus had used to buy his silence and his obedience, and hurled it onto the marble floor with every ounce of force his combat-trained arm could generate. The crystal face shattered into 100 glittering pieces that scattered across the polished stone like shrapnel. The sound was sharp, final, and absolute. The enemy alliance had just cannibalized itself. That was my cue. I stepped out of the shadows and onto the center aisle. I didn't rush. I walked with the absolute, terrifying authority of a commanding officer advancing on a position that had already been secured. My stride was measured, precise, each step calculated. The golden stage light caught the white fabric of my dress uniform, and the brass buttons reflected the overhead lights like small controlled fires. Generals stepped back respectfully to clear a path. The Vanguard guards flanking the aisle snapped to attention and threw crisp salutes as I passed their perimeter, each one a crack of heels against marble that punctuated my approach. I stopped directly in front of the VIP row. I looked down at the billionaire, who was now a trembling, shrinking wreck pressed against the back of a leather chair that no longer belonged to him. His gold rings looked cheap. His tailored suit looked borrowed. The man who had thrown wine in my face and called me useless was gasping for air, his chest hitching in shallow, broken spasms. I didn't yell. I didn't display a single ounce of anger. Anger was a civilian indulgence. I had something far more devastating. I had jurisdiction. "Mr. Williams." My voice was flat and hollow, a surgical instrument slicing through the silence of the room. "Your disorderly conduct, verbal assault of an active duty officer, and attempt to profiteer inside a classified Pentagon facility have been fully recorded by our security systems." I watched the blood drain from his lips. His jaw slackened. His gold-ringed fingers gripped the armrest so hard the tendons stood out like bridge cables under his mottled skin. The reality hit him in waves, each sentence landing like a body blow to the solar plexus. He wasn't being scolded by a frustrated daughter. He wasn't being embarrassed at a dinner table. He was being financially executed by a commissioned officer of the United States military. And every word was being recorded into the permanent federal record. His billion-dollar Rolodex, his Pentagon dinner invitations, his courtside seats with defense secretaries, all of it was dissolving in real time, and he could see it happening behind his own eyes. Chloe whimpered beside him, a low animal sound that came from somewhere below her throat. She pressed herself into the back of her chair, her diamond necklace catching the stage light in a way that made it look like cheap costume jewelry. I submitted the encrypted logs of your corporate espionage requests to the DoD Inspector General. Your security clearance is suspended pending federal indictment, and your federal contracts are currently under seizure. I let the words settle into the dead air. The silence was so complete I could hear Marcus's breathing, short, ragged, wet. 1 second of absolute nothing. Then, escort him off my base. The Vanguard operators moved with ruthless efficiency. 2 guards grabbed Marcus under his armpits and hoisted him into the air like he weighed nothing. His Italian leather shoes dragged across the marble floor, producing high-pitched, pathetic squeak that echoed through the silent auditorium. The other 2 operators secured a screaming, hysterical Chloe, her designer heels scraping uselessly against the stone as she clawed at the air. They physically dragged them backward down the center aisle. No handcuffs, no firearms drawn, no need. The economic death sentence had ripped the soul right out of Marcus Williams. His pathetic cries echoed off the walls and faded as the distance grew. Chloe's mascara-streaked face twisted into a grotesque mask of disbelief as she reached toward Miller, toward the generals, toward anyone who might stop the world from collapsing. Nobody moved. Nobody intervened. The auditorium erupted into a second massive wave of applause, louder than the first, heavier, because this one carried the full weight of justice delivered. I turned my back to them. I faced the Admiral. I squared my shoulders and stood at attention while the applause rolled through the room. The parasite was excised. The battlefield was secure. 1 year later, the new order was running. I sat in my sunlit office at the Norfolk Naval Base, black coffee steaming beside my keyboard, maintaining overwatch of the intelligence network alongside the men and women who had actually bled for me. A framed photo of my Vanguard team sat on the windowsill next to a small American flag. The morning light hit the glass and threw a faint rainbow across my desk. The fallout from losing the Pentagon clearance was a death blow that Marcus never saw coming and could never recover from. His corporate partners didn't wait for explanations. They panicked and fled like rats, abandoning a burning building. Williams' corpse stock tanked to pennies within 90 days. The politicians who used to drink his 30-year scotch and smoke his imported cigars instantly disavowed him. Lobbying firms deleted his number. Country club memberships were revoked. His decades-old empire, constructed from manipulation, stolen valor, and the systematic exploitation of real soldiers, burned to the ground. Nobody rushed in with a fire extinguisher. Nobody mourned. The following morning, my encrypted civilian email server chimed. One new message glowing in the inbox. Sender Chloe. Subject line, "The family needs you." I opened the message. It was a long, groveling essay soaked in the kind of manufactured tears that Chloe had spent a lifetime perfecting. She weaponized our childhood memories, the treehouse we built when I was 9 the summer she braided my hair before Sunday church. She invoked our mother's name 3 times. She begged me in the sacred name of blood and family to use my military connections to rescue the company and save our dad from total financial ruin. I read every word with the same cold detachment I applied when analyzing intercepted enemy communications. My pulse didn't flutter. My breathing remained flat and even. The sentences were textbook emotional manipulation, guilt-tripping wrapped in nostalgia, designed to reactivate the same loyalty reflex that my dying mother had triggered 6 years ago. But the parasites hadn't changed. They never would. This is the fundamental nature of the species when bullying fails. They pivot to crying. When violence stops producing results, they weaponize vulnerability. The tactics rotate. The hunger remains identical. I rested my hand on the computer mouse. The debt to my mother was paid in full the moment I placed that gold-embossed invitation into Marcus's hand. I gave them the chance she asked me to give. They used it to humiliate me one final time in front of my own brothers in arms. The contract was fulfilled. The books were balanced. The anchor was cut. I didn't reply. I didn't feel a shred of pity. I right-clicked the message. I selected delete. Then my fingers moved across the keyboard with the same speed and precision I used to crack enemy communications networks, configuring a permanent firewall rule to block Chloe's IP address from ever reaching my servers again. The infected tissue was fully amputated. I closed the laptop, stood up, walked to the window. The massive gray warships anchored in the harbor sat low and heavy in the water, loaded with purpose and power. A formation of F-18s cut across the morning sky in a tight V pattern, their engines leaving white contrails that dissolved slowly into clear blue. The war was over. The sky was completely clear. And for the first time in 32 years, the silence around me didn't hurt. I survived the darkest trenches of family betrayal by trusting my own strength and the brotherhood that earned my loyalty. Through blood and fire, not through birth certificates and last names. And if this story resonated with you, please like this video, subscribe to the channel, and drop your thoughts in the comments below. Never let anyone, even blood, convince you that you are not the hero of your own life.